Merry Christmas. I was going to pull a Dave there and see if there was any Grinches around. Any Grinches who don't want to have their trees up yet? A few? Okay, yeah, I see some hands. My kids got us to put it up a week ago. I have never, ever put up a tree in November. That has nothing to do with the sermon. I was just going to pull a Dave and see if there was some Grinches around. My sermon is actually on my very favorite text this morning. It comes from the book of John. So if you want to open if you bought a Bible with you to the chapter 18, you're going to see a conversation in there between two very powerful people. One is the prefect of all of Judea. The other has power in a completely different realm that he displays in a very unlikely way. Now, who has seen a movie of this dialogue between Pilate and Jesus before? I would expect most of you have, right? I love the many renditions of how this is done. And have you got that up there, Lisa, the PowerPoint? There's so many different versions of how Pilate and Jesus intersect. They each new year, it seems they come out with a different drama, and I think the dramas talk more about the culture or the perspective from that year. I don't think they're digging up new historical evidence. And here's an example. When do you ever see Pilate as a historical Pilate? You always see him as this nice guy who wants to set Jesus free. He's good looking. He's probably bald in a lot of the ones, but he's a good looking bald man, good head shape, and he's fighting for justice for Jesus. He wants to set him free. And you see a guy who wants to do the right thing. Well, the historical Pilate was nothing like that. He was actually dismissed from his position as prefect for unnecessary harshness to the Israelite people. He was known for taunting, for being so violent and so savage that they didn't even want him in that position. So that isn't the historical person we see in the movies, nor is the Jesus often the historical one either. In fact, I was watching one this week, and Jesus looked, pardon me, like a stoner. He looked like he was high while he was talking to Pilate. I don't know if you've seen this one from the 70s, but he's kind of staring off into space. His pupils look dilated, and he looks like he's not really paying attention. Perhaps the director of this movie thought that to really convey just how spiritual Jesus was, he had to make him like some kind of Eastern guru who was detached from this world and on a higher plane. But that isn't Jesus either. That's a 70s version of Jesus. What all of these movies do provide, though, is a slightly different take on this really fascinating dialogue I wanted to look at. There's a couple questions, and because we don't have punctuation in the original, we don't know whether it was an exclamation mark or a question mark. We don't know, for example, if it's, "You are a king then?" or "Then you are a king." Because we don't even know whether the word order in the original is as we would translate it in English. So when we see these different takes on this in different movies, it gives a little bit of new perspective each time to this question. And the couple questions that are asked here begin with this famous one. Are you the king of the Jews? Now, most of the gospel writers just reply, "It is as you say," or "I am." But in John, this is why I love John. And if you want to look at it there, what do you see? In John, we get a little bit more. Probably John was the only one who was actually there at the trial. We know that Peter was busy denying Jesus. We know that the rest of the disciples, most of them fled. Probably only John had the real content of what was said here. He was probably the only witness. And because of that, and because John was written after the other Gospels, we have more dialogue in John, and I love it. We see a question for a question. When I was in Bible school, I remember pondering how Jesus was always responding with a question to his disciples. So I pictured, what would it like to be one of those disciples, and you'd ask Jesus a question, and you'd get a question back. Have you ever wondered that? Would that be a little frustrating? You never got a direct answer to your question? You always got another question? I was thinking they're coming up to him, "Hey, Jesus, you want a hot chocolate?" And Jesus has to have a question back. Will hot chocolate or living water really fill a soul? Yeah, okay, it's getting cold, Jesus. Just take it or not. Well, this isn't just Jesus who does this. This is a rabbinical style. If you were a rabbi in that day, you would reply with a question, and there's a reason for that. It just so happens that Jesus is very good at this technique. The reason is you want to get what is behind the question. And Jesus does this masterfully when he talks to Pilate. He gets behind his question. What does Pilate ask? He says, "Are you king of the Jews?" And Jesus asks him a question back. He says, "Do you ask this on your own, or did others tell you about me?" When he asks this question, he gets at some of the assumptions that Pilate would have had. See, Pilate answers again with a question, but this time rhetorical. Well, am I a Jew? Am I a Jew? Kings are relevant only to their kingdoms, so how would you as a king of Jews be relevant to me? In other words, what do I care if you're a king or not? Because you're only a king of the Jews, so what difference would that make to me? But Jesus gets behind what Pilate is asking with this, "Are you king of the Jews?" and brings another realm into question here of authority. Remember that other conversation he has with Pilate? Where Pilate says to Jesus, "Hey, aren't you going to speak? You know, I have the power to set you free here. Aren't you going to stand up for yourself?" And what does Jesus say? "You would have no authority unless it was given to you in heaven." Jesus starts talking about a different kind of kingdom than the one that Pilate is used to, where it doesn't matter whether you're in an Israelite or a Roman kingdom. It isn't whether you're just king of the Jews. There's a higher plane that we're talking about. And he gets behind that question with his rabbinical style, which seems maybe a little sassy to us. We're not used to that. Jews would have known this. They knew that all rabbis talk this way. And he starts digging. And it takes Pilate to another question. He says, your own people and chief priests handed you over to me. That's unusual, isn't it? If he was king of the Jews, why would the so-called subjects he had, the people that he was supposedly a king over, why would they be turning him in? And he says, what is it you have done? Notice not just what crime have you committed, but what is it you have done? He's asking a broader question here. How did you get yourself to be turned in from your subjects to the Romans? And why are they doing this? There's a big question going on here. What is it about you, Jesus? What is it you have done that's accomplished you to be turned in for a death sentence? And Jesus starts talking about what it is he's done. He has instituted a kingdom, a new kingdom. He says, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then my servants would be fighting so that I would not be handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not of this realm. I'm sure you've heard that before. Maybe you haven't, but you probably have heard those words. But I want to think of those again for the first time and consider what he's saying here. What is Jesus saying when he says, my kingdom is not of this world? I've been turning over in my own head, where is my kingdom? What do I hold of value in my own life? What do I prioritize? As I've been reading a lot about this text, as I've been thinking a lot about this text, I've been asking that question of myself. Where is my kingdom? You see, Jesus says that kingdoms are defended, that the kingdoms of this world, if you go against the king, there'll be some bodyguards there. And what happens at Jesus' arrest? Who protects him? Peter takes up a sword, doesn't he? But when he does, when Peter takes up a sword and lashes out, strikes, cuts off Malchus's ear, what does Jesus tell him to do? He says, put your sword back in its place. And in very famous words, for all who draw the sword will die by the sword. Now I could just imagine, this is only recorded in Luke, what happens next. But I can just imagine why it might have been in Luke only. See, Luke was a physician, a doctor, and he wanted the orderly account of what happened, right? So he would have been asking witnesses, so what happened out there? What did you see? And when he hears about this guy getting his ear cut off, Malchus, he says, so what happened to him? None of the other witnesses, none of the other gospel writers record this detail except the doctor, Luke, and he says, what happened to him? And you can just picture the witnesses saying, well, the same thing Jesus did for everyone who was sick. He touched him, and he healed and restored his ear. It's so regular for Jesus to do this. Everybody he meets, he's healing. They don't even record that detail in the first synoptic gospels. Only in John's do we see, only in Luke do we see that detail recorded. And it's significant because it shows a different way of doing kingdom work. It's not about violence, enforcing, defending, protecting. It's about something that killing somebody can't do, that violence can't accomplish, that authority and power through that can't get done. He can restore, he can make new, and he can heal. He has a very different set of tools within his tool belt. And he says to Peter, no more of this. This isn't about violence with the sword. And then he touches the man's ear and heals him. I've wondered, okay, well, what God am I guarding? What am I taking up the sword to protect? What, if I'm asking, where is my kingdom? And you're saying that a kingdom of this world is defended. What am I defending? What am I guarding? Am I guarding my comfortable lifestyle? Am I guarding my status, my reputation, the respect I have? Am I guarding my family? How about my possessions? How about my house? How about all of these comforts that I have in my lifestyle? Is this what's important to me? Is this what I'm defending? Or am I living for another kingdom? What does it mean to live for Jesus' kingdom? I've really been asking that over and over. I've been reading about it, and there's been lots of new insight in what I've been reading about, in what it means. One of the things that first came to me, maybe a sort of assumption you could say, was that this word sacrifice, that clearly if we're going to live for Jesus' kingdom, it's going to involve sacrifice. And here's what I thought of when I first was trying to answer this question. That in the Gospels and as we see in the stories of the patriarchs, and as we witness even in Hebrews, where I'm quoting here, we retell that faith has a lot to do with sacrifice. Look at Abraham. By faith, he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. I'm reading from Hebrews 11:9. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. What does that tell us? That he left, a wealthy man Abraham was, he left all of his comforts, he sacrificed those things to go live in a tent to a place he didn't even know where he was going, and he was waiting with faith for something that had foundations. He was waiting for a different kind of kingdom. I know that Jesus said to one of the people who was trying to get in on his kingdom that, I'm not exactly sure why this follower was asking, but he was going along the road and someone says, I will follow you. I will follow you wherever you go. Maybe this person had heard the messianic rumors. They had seen the 4 signs that Jesus was trying to fulfill to show that he was the Messiah. Or maybe they were interested in getting on the ground floor. If Jesus became a king, he'd likely have a palace. Maybe there'd be some kind of an administrative position or in charge of the army or something. Who knows what kind of self-interest this man had when he was asking. But what does Jesus say to him? He says, foxes have dens and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. He's saying, I don't even have a house. There's no palace. I don't even have a house. I'm basically homeless. I mean, I could live with Mary, I suppose, but he doesn't marry himself. He doesn't take a family. Some people, I know maybe some of you guys read these novels about how Jesus married and had kids. There is no historical evidence for that, and there would be, because there was a great interest in showing that he had no children. There was no children, there was no family, there was no home, there was nothing. I thought of some people who've taken that kind of sacrifice. This is what came as sort of a gut level idea with the sacrifice. I thought of Dr. Paul Brandt. Who's heard of Dr. Paul Brandt before? A few of you have. This man was a genius in his own right, and he was a doctor who could have been very comfortable, very well set up in America if he'd stayed in America doing research. Who knows? He could have maybe gotten some new pharmaceutical drug that made him millions. He could have been famous, but instead he chose to give up what he had as a doctor in comfort and to go and work amongst the poor. And he worked amongst lepers, people who didn't have money to pay him back. He wasn't working some kind of a private practice where he was going to make a lot of money. He probably didn't get a lot of money or any from any of the lepers that he helped. But he was very keenly concerned in doing research to relieve the suffering of these people. And he lived among them in such a way that at one point he wondered himself if he had gotten leprosy because he was so closely living amongst them. Luckily he hadn't, but he wondered that. Or I thought of Mother Theresa. That's a person of sacrifice, isn't it? When you think stereotype sacrifice. A person who goes to the very poorest of the poor in the world, who goes and lives amongst these people, not worried about her own comfort, but worried about how the people that she is working with, the other mothers, the other nuns who are working with her, are comfortable, the volunteers. It's told that she would take the newest shoes and she would make sure those volunteers had good shoes because she knew her old feet weren't going to be there much longer. But she wanted to think of others. And in the poorest of the poor, she wasn't trying to set the hopes and dreams of these people. They had no hopes and dreams. She was in a house of the dying. These people maybe had hours or days, and all that she could hope to accomplish with them was to give them dignity in their last hours or days, to love them and show them compassion when they were dying. Or here's another person I thought of. I thought of Bruce Olson, a man, or perhaps better to say he was a teenager or a boy. Because as a teenager, he said, I want to go and share this gospel message that somebody shared with me. I want to change lives. And no mission organization would accept him. Who's heard of Bruce Olson or read his book, Bruchko? So he went out as a teenager. This is a page turner if you haven't read this book. As a teenager, he went out there, no mission organization behind him, and he went into the jungles of the Amazon to the Motor people who were basically headhunters. They killed anyone who came and tried to evangelize or say anything to them. Even the people who tried to trade with them, they would kill those people. So he kind of lived in the jungle for a long time, trying to offer gifts and trying to get some clout with them, and eventually he was hunted by them too, but he didn't die. And he got so sick that they took him in. He had a tapeworm in that chapter in the book. If you have a weak stomach, skip the tapeworm chapter in that book. He worked and eventually discovered there was a prophecy in the Modeloan people, that the banana leaf man would come and show them the truth. And you're like, banana leaf? What? Well, banana leaf was the closest papery thing they had. And when they saw his Bible, they're like, the banana leaves. That's what we were waiting for. His Bible would show them the truth. And they were waiting for this man to plant that seed and share the gospel with them. And the result was that the fruit was there with them. This tribe has been transformed by Bruce Olson's work. I even thought of my own dad, who, when he was working with ADAC in Alberta, he had it made. He was having a good income. He was comfortable with us. But then he wanted something else, to go to another province, to BC, to take his whole family. There was no income guaranteed. There was no job there. It was only a hope and a dream he had. And he chose rather to have all this treasure in a kingdom on earth, to have all this investment, to have a different kind of treasure in people who had been in addictions, who Jesus would restore their lives and there would be a different kind of fruit with them. And I think of him and I think, okay, that typifies sacrifice. But what about me? I'm pretty comfortable. I haven't done a lot of sacrifices. What about us? Because in all these stereotypes, Mother Theresa, don't you feel a little bit guilty? Like, am I really doing anything at all? Have I really made any impact here? See, in the old days, I think there was this thinking that you were a missionary, and that was on a pedestal. Or if you couldn't cut that, maybe you could be a full-time minister. Or if you couldn't cut that, well, at least you could make some money in some kind of business and pray and pay for these people, the real heroes out there. And the rest of us are just the lowly ones who are looking on at these heroes. sort of like we read the biblical heroes. Has anybody ever felt that, like I have? Well, what about the painters and accountants and nurses and teachers, the people who fixed airplanes, the rest of us? Do we have a part in this kingdom? What does it mean for us to live in Jesus' kingdom? Because remember, Jesus' kingdom is not about a place or stuff, right? It's not about property. It's not about armies. So if it isn't about what kind of place or stuff or goods we have, what is it about? It clearly can't just be defined by sacrifice if it isn't about stuff. One of the things that I think is characteristic of living for Jesus' kingdom is looking for opportunity. It puts a very different spin on every single conversation we have when we're at work, when we're talking, because you're going to have somebody to talk to, whether you're retired, whether you work in an airplane place. Maybe there's a few jobs out there where you work by yourself. Has anybody worked by themselves all the time? I'm sorry, because that's pretty lonely. Anybody? No, good. Nobody? Oh, Chuck has for a while. Not many of us work by ourselves. And even then, you go home and you have family and you have friends. We always have interactions. Each one of those is an opportunity. Look at Jesus, how he looks at opportunities. Remember, he was on trial. If any one of us were on that trial, and it was a trumped-up trial, there was nothing behind it, they couldn't even get their accusations right, we would be busy defending ourselves, would we not? Saying, oh, I don't, can't you hear how these people can't agree? I didn't do anything wrong here. Look, I don't deserve death. I don't deserve to be flogged. But Jesus isn't talking about himself. He isn't defending himself. What does he say? He's looking at Pilate as an opportunity. Because when he asks him, do you say this of yourself? He's really asking him, are you interested in me as a king? Are you interested in the truth? I wonder what opportunities are in front of us. Just like this opportunity was in front of Jesus, there are opportunities in front of us wherever we go. And sometimes we can miss those things. We might be searching for an opportunity and miss it. Because look at how Pilate misses this opportunity. Pilate has this dialogue, doesn't he, with Jesus? And at the end of it, what's the most famous thing that he says? What is truth? I love watching this one in all the movies, because every movie shows a little different. Some of them have the finger on the side of the face. Philosophically, what is truth? Others are throwing up the hands. Well, what is truth? Others are more of a question. What is truth, Jesus? And Pilate misses truth, the opportunity right in front of him, because he's asking the wrong question. It's not a what. Truth isn't a what, it's a who. Truth is a who, and it's in the person of Jesus. In the person of Jesus, I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the life. Only he can offer resurrection. Only he can offer life. Only he has this answer, and Pilate misses this opportunity. Pilate's busy thinking his own thoughts in his own world. Maybe we're searching for the kingdom of God, and we're missing it too. Maybe we're searching for opportunities, and they're right in front of us. You were a king then, Pilate says. You say that I am a king, Jesus replies. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me. I like that last line. I think it's very important. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me. What does that mean? Lee Strobel, he was educated in Yale Law School. You probably heard of him because of his book in The Case for Christ, or The Case for the Creator, or The Case for... The Chicago Tribune was his realm when he was a journalist. He also worked for other newspapers. But his wife was a Christian. And when they married in 80, he set out to answer a different kind of journalistic journey. What is this about this guy Jesus? And he was a skeptic, but he did some digging. And as a journalist, he wanted to get behind the history, behind the trial, behind the plausibility of Jesus' resurrection. And we all know the end of that story because of the books he writes, that he was transformed in his search for the truth. So when we read in that last line that everyone on the side of truth listens to me, there's hope. Because rather than seeing the skeptic as somebody who would never come to belief, we can see the skeptic as somebody who has good questions. And maybe once they answer those questions with the truth, are going to be the ones who will champion the cause the most, like Lee Strobel has. Those skeptics can be the ones who become on fire when they discover the truth is completely unexpected in the person of Jesus. We can have hope for all the skeptics in our life, the people we think will never bite on Jesus, would never come to church. I was watching this dialogue here between, on your left, the rabbi, and on the right, a Messianic Jew. And the debate they were having was, is Jesus the Messiah? Now, as they were talking, this rabbi on the left, he's very polite. But that host back there, he says, no, I want to really know what you think. And he says, okay, here's what I really think. Jesus, if he was the Messiah, is a huge letdown to us Jews. We've read the prophecies. Psalm 96. We know what we can expect to happen. It's written there, and it hasn't happened. So if this is really the Messiah, this is really the result, this is really as good as it's going to get, that's a big disappointment. I don't care if he pulled some trick where he came back to life in 3 days. I care about the end result. And the end result, I don't buy into that at all. He's no Messiah that I want. This other Messianic Jew begins to describe to him some of the kind of change that Jesus did bring about. And in my next sermon, we're going to look at our Advent series about peace. And I want to give more detail and flesh out a little bit about the kind of impact that Jesus and his followers have had in the world. Because we don't get that on the media. We don't hear it in the news. We don't see any of the stuff about missionaries actually accomplishing some good in other countries. We just hear that they're interfering with the culture. They're infecting it with Westernism. We don't hear any of the positives. And I want to outline some of what Jesus has instituted, because he didn't just come to say that the kingdom was coming. He came to announce that the kingdom had begun in him. It was his proclamation. See, when Jesus was a teenager, there was a proclamation. Just like this kind of proclamation, just like somebody marching into your land and saying, like it or lump it, we're here, take it or leave it, there's a new regime. Anybody know what regime change happened when teenager Jesus was living in Nazareth? There would have been some people coming into his town to say that the 40-year Augustus, Caesar Augustus, had died, and the new Tiberius was here. And like it or lump it, you better follow him. Regime change is a time that's sensitive. It's sensitive to all kinds of revolutionaries coming and starting a revolt. They knew that. So they would have probably come to each of those towns with a bit of an army to make this announcement. But Jesus doesn't make his announcement with an army. He makes his proclamation with Scripture. He makes his proclamation to people who don't expect it. And he does it without violence. He does it without an army. He does it without that kind of thing. He does it as volunteer work, which really gets this Jew upset. Come on, just a few followers? What is that? That's not the Messiah. A few volunteers? To show that it's truly by choice, that it is truly not enforced with the sword, not impressed on you, not forced on you. The same people who've gone to the same schools, had the same, maybe the same professor, studied the same data, looked at the same evidence, will come to the drastically different conclusions about Jesus, won't they? One will say, there's no reason to believe that at all. No historical data. The other will say, it is crystal clear. No, 3, 4. God has provided an environment perfect for us to discover him in love. Not by force, not by there's no other conclusion to be drawn here, but by him reaching down in love to us, allowing our will to be a part of this decision, and us to be in a love relationship to accept his adoption. And when we do, it spreads the world in a very different way than the Nazi army. It spreads it more like organic wildflowers spreading their seed and just covering the hillsides. It's people who are filled with the joy of God, want to do what Jesus did and continue his work. And I know some of you are saying, no, that hippie stuff, it won't accomplish anything, Jeremy, because without a gun, the policeman is no good. Without some kind of enforcement here, you can't get anywhere in a kingdom. If you don't have an army, it's no good. And we know the army will come. The army will come later to make this the just place, to make it to peace, to make it truly all of what God wanted for his kingdom. After everybody has had their say, after everybody has had the opportunity to embrace it in love. For now, we have a chance, an opportunity with our friends to turn them from that question of what is truth to who is truth. So whether you are a painter or unemployed or are in retirement, or whether you think, I am not anything like those missionaries you talked about. I am not anything like those famous people who've done so much. Every one of us has relationships and people around us who don't know Jesus, who we can share this truth as a person with, and share that his love is not oppressive like I used to see it. When I was a teenager, I thought God was just out to get us. Now I've realized he is just reaching out to us with goodness, reaching out to us with his care, his compassion, his love, so that we'll accept what he has. That's an opportunity for all of us. I want to pray, and as I'm doing that, and as you're thinking about how organically God is spreading his life into the world, I'm going to ask our music team to come up. We're going to sing the new song again as we pray. I get them to come up to the front here.